This week, Adam talks to Noah Van Sciver, author of the historical graphic novel Joseph Smith and the Mormons. He talks about making an objective book about a religious figure and how the Latter-day Saints reacted to it, adjusting to being a new father, and more. First, if you appreciate the work we do on deconstructing comics and our other podcasts and want bonus content, we'd love it if you'd support the show at patreon.com/deconcomics for as little as $2 a month. Our monthly issue-by-issue look at 1960s Amazing Spider-Man comics is available to patrons chipping in at least $4 a month. Check out our goals and rewards and pledge your support now at patreon.com/deconcomics. This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics.
You're listening to Deconstructing Comics. I'm Adam Passion, and my guest today is the author of many graphic novels, including Saint Cole, Fanty Bukowski, Hypo, The Melancholic Young Lincoln. His book, My Hot Date, was awarded an Ignatz Award in 2016, and his latest book, Joseph Smith and the Mormons, has just come out from Abrams Comic Arts. I am joined today by Noah Van Sciver. Noah, how are you?
I'm doing well. You got me on a good morning.
That's good. Are there bad mornings as well? I was actually going to ask you, how is it now, like, keeping up with your comics career, like having a child in the house? Has it affected things, or have you sort of figured out your schedules?
Oh, it's really affected me because, I'm used to just drawing for like 9 hours straight a day. But, this past year, I've been the least productive I think I've ever been since I decided to be a cartoonist, like decided to take it seriously.
Yeah.
I draw, I get like 4 hours a day when we have a nanny here. And I just try and get as much done as I can in that time period. But I think it's definitely affected me because I don't have enough time to think about what I want to work on.
Sure.
I can't really get into that headspace that I should be in to think about projects and stuff like that. But other than that, I mean, it's worthwhile. I'll trade. I have a beautiful, healthy son, so I'm very lucky.
Oh, definitely. I like hearing you say that. I have these kind of mixed feelings because we're about the same age, and like watching other guys who are our age kind of progress in their career, and then me kind of faltering because I had kids really young. I had kids like in my early 20s, so I always felt like, if I was very happy to have them, but if I didn't have my kids, maybe my career would be going the same path as everybody else's or something. So, but I totally agree with you. It's definitely a good trade-off. So
yeah, absolutely. It's worthwhile. So yeah, I think I'm happier in my private life more than I ever have been. So I'll trade that in for living in agony alone in an apartment and drawing great comics.
Yeah. Do you think there's anything to that idea that like you have to be suffering to make great art, or do you think that's just bullshit?
Well, you have to go through periods of suffering. It's not like strictly true, but like when I've been in like certain moods, that's when I've written some of my best stuff. And those weren't like happy moods. But right. Like suffering, like, good suffering, not suffering like, I lost my leg or something like that, or, like suffering like you're just feeling alone, or something like that. Like that's okay. That's okay suffering. That's not agony,
Right.
But you shouldn't like the starving artist thing. I don't believe in, because you need food to create art.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I always noticed that, in your work, especially some of your more personal stuff, there's always kind of like a tinge of sadness and like, I don't know, self-deprecation that's also kind of put in with the humor and stuff. So I think that if you don't have any kind of experience to base that on, then, then it comes off as insincere. So
yeah, definitely. And the thing about having a kid is that, frequently this past year, I've had ideas that I thought, man, that's great, I got to write that down. But I wasn't able to write it down, and then it's just gone. So like, I've had like all these like great ideas for comics that are just gone now. They're just back in the air. So
that's like that Mitch Hedberg bit where he says, sometimes I think of a joke, and then if the pad of paper is too far away, I have to convince myself that it wasn't a very good joke.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I'm like, I got to write this down, and then I get like spit up on or something, and then
Sure.
can't get to it, and then it's gone.
Well, you're very right about the idea of the headspace. Like, I think a lot of people think that having a child is about the time that it takes or whatever. But I think a lot of it is mental energy because, I mean, making comics is a very mentally taxing thing unless you're just, in one of those phases where you're just adding color or something like that. But
yeah. Yeah, which I like that phase too. I like to just sit and zone out and listen to a podcast and just color pages. That's nice.
Yeah,
but yeah,
it's very zen.
It's hard. The headspace thing. It's like you have to be really present. Like if you're watching after a baby, like you have to be in that moment all the time. So nothing else can get in the way of that, or it'll be a danger or something.
Sure. Well, I mean, speaking as a guy whose kids are all in middle school now, it does get a lot easier as they get older and more independent. I think you're in probably the most time consuming part of the process, but yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what we're just waiting for. I know this stuff is probably so boring to people who don't have kids, but like we're just waiting for like a daycare to open up because it takes forever to get your kid into daycare. That's something they don't tell you about. It's like the wait list can be years long,
And then they're out of that need to have daycare, right? So
yeah, right. So
yeah. Well, so let's get talking about your book. First of all, I just want to say that I was really, really impressed with it. And I know that I think we first kind of crossed paths. I think back in 2011, you did a comic strip for the anthology that I made about the tsunami here. I think that's the first time we came across each other, right?
Yeah.
And I think even at that time, you were already talking about this book, right? You had it on the back burner for a long time.
Yeah, that's right. I've been thinking about doing it for a long time and like struggling to get to it, but I just wasn't artistically prepared to do it, and maybe like mentally too. I probably could have drawn it, but it wouldn't have come out right. I just wasn't there in my life yet to really get to it, and take it seriously like it needed to be taken.
Well, it's really interesting to me, this book, because you have kind of an interesting I don't know how to say, I guess you bounce around in different type of genres. So you do like very, very kind of personal, almost kind of memoir type of work, but then you also have historical things like Elijah Lovejoy and the Lincoln book. And this one sort of marries the two, I feel like, because it does seem very personal. Obviously, these are your roots, sort of, and it's kind of a searching of that. But at the same time, it is a very kind of straightforward historical take on this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess the one thing that I really wanted to say and this isn't really a question so much as a statement, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, is I really admire how objective that you were in this storytelling, because it would have been really easy to just kind of write an expose and say, look at this guy, or the other side to kind of say, this is the real Joseph Smith, and kind of defend it. But you don't ever really come out on either side. I could imagine a devout Mormon reading this and finding your take on Joseph Smith very sympathetic. And at the same time, if a skeptic read it, he would come off as a charlatan. And I think it really does justice to the story that you kind of tell it very straight. I mean, that was a deliberate thing, I think, right?
Yeah, that's right. I wasn't trying to make like an anti Joseph Smith LDS screed, and I wasn't trying to make the kind of book that the church could have made. I needed to make something that was just, here's the story, and then you can read it as somebody who knows it or somebody who doesn't know it, and you can decide for yourself what you think of it. I just I wasn't trying to preach to anybody.
Were you thinking about those kind of audience, though, when you were making this? Were you thinking, what will Mormon people think when they're reading this? Or
I tried my best not to, because that would have altered it. So I kind of had to just pretend that I was the only person that knew the story. The only person who was like learning about it, and then just kind of draw it from that perspective and not think about what anybody was going to think about it. I mean, my father is still very devout in the church, and I couldn't think about like what he was going to think of what I was doing, and I couldn't. My mom is the opposite. She's no longer in the church, and she despises it. And I didn't want to think of what she was going to think of. You know, it's the only thing that mattered was myself, and just telling the story that felt right to me, you know, as it came out.
Yeah, I think that, for people who didn't grow up in that super religious environment, because I grew up in a very, very kind of conservative evangelical family. So for people who don't come from that type of background, I think it's hard to kind of wrap your head around how much that's part of your identity, and how, you know, if I were to write a book about my you know, kind of religious upbringing, I don't know if I could, you know, honestly, I would get in that headspace where I'm thinking about what would my pastor of a father think about this, you know, and things like that. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, well, it's tricky. And I did have a lot of conversations with my father, but it was because he's sort of a scholar about the history of the church, but from a member's point of view, like he would never touch anything that questions the truth of the church. He only reads, he knows everything about the church from the perspective of the church, you know?
Sure.
So, but still I had a lot of questions that needed to be answered or things I needed to talk through. And he was always willing to pick up the phone and talk to me about it. I don't think he doesn't like the book now. Like, I don't think he likes it. He doesn't like what I've done. But I guess that was to be expected. You know.
Well, that's something I kind of wanted to pick your brain about, because, you know, there's a few choices that you made here that are really, really interesting to me. One is that the blurb on the back of the book is not from a cartoonist or anything like that. It's from, you know, a kind of renowned Mormon scholar, I think, right? Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
And also, in the very beginning of the book, it says that the original artwork is, you donated that to Brigham Young University. Is that?
I did, because I did. And I have mixed feelings about the publisher putting that in there, because it made it seem like the church has something to do with this book, and they don't have anything to do with it. I don't think they even like it if they've seen it. But BYU has a collection of work from people that were associated with the church that they keep on their campus for, I don't know, safekeeping, and for people who if somebody wanted to write a paper on this book or something. Yeah. I wanted to keep all of the artwork together in a safe place with all the notes and all the research material that went into it. And they offered to house it there, so I put it there. But I have mixed feelings about the blurb on the inside cover, because I'm like, this really makes it seem like the church has something to do with this, and they certainly do not. But, yeah.
I didn't take it that way at all. I did take it as something where it's obviously something where you as the author are definitely not antagonistic towards the church, is the way I kind of took it. Like, you know, obviously if you have a Mormon person writing the blurb and things like that, then what really struck me was that it was a positive blurb that he wrote, a very, very positive blurb. And I just wondered if Mormon people in general are kind of, I guess, obviously they're not monolith. I can't paint them all with a broad brush, but that made it seem like Mormon people are kind of open to seeing Joseph Smith as a flawed human and not necessarily as some perfect prophet or something. Am I correct in that understanding, or?
Well, it depends. There are different generations in the church, different types of LDS members. So like the younger ones have reached out to me, like a lot of younger members have reached out and said that they really like the book. They like the way that I portrayed Emma, and that, you know, they have like things about it that they didn't get to see in their own media that feels right to them that I did. And they really appreciate that. So I've gotten like a few messages like that. I've gotten praise from people that are within the church, but then, and the people that have more like open mind are kind of more open-minded about it, maybe artistic. But then there are like there's like an older generation within the church that are very staunch, I guess is the word. Sure. And they don't like it. They, you know, if it's not something that's very reverential of their prophet, and doesn't show any, you know, because I showed some of the frailties of him, you know, some of the some of the fallibility of Joseph Smith in the book, because
Sure.
I felt like he's a human being, and that's how I want to portray him. I don't want to portray him the way that the church does. He wasn't some like saintly man. Like, I just saw him as a very ambitious human being who like accomplished something incredible. But and he had a lot of faults and he did a lot of bad things as well. But they just don't want to hear that. They don't want to see that stuff. They say that it's all lies and all this stuff, and that's just the way it goes. I don't know what to say to them. That's just the way it goes.
Yeah. It's too bad because it makes him much more sympathetic as a historical person when you see like the way that you portray him, especially without even getting into the things of like his, sealing young women and things like that, just his ego, and little things like that, where it makes him a very human person and not just a character in a book. It's very, for me personally, if I were Mormon, I would find that to be, almost more compelling than keeping him as a hero,
Yeah. I think he's a very clever person, very clever and like very striving and stuff. Because, you start off the book and they're very poor. They're awful farmers and stuff. And they are figuring out how to survive with this in the middle of this whole like magical thinking period where they say like, we have this stone, we can find treasure on your property, because this is upstate New York, and around this whole region there were a bunch of Native American mounds on people's properties that were full of, they were burial sites basically, but people were just pillaging them, and they were finding all sorts of artifacts in there. And nobody knew what they were all about. They didn't know, what the history of this land was, or who these people were that were all in these mounds, and like everything like that. So anyway, it was an environment that was like ripe for storytelling, and you could take advantage of that, especially if you were somebody who's just trying to survive. Sure. But all that stuff is really controversial, but I don't see why it should be. I mean, I don't think that if you believe that Joseph Smith was a prophet, you can't also accept that him and his family were involved in this scheme of treasure hunting. I don't see why one thing has to negate the other thing, but I don't know. Yeah. They're very protective about that.
Yeah, I think, like I said, growing up in a very religious environment myself, it's kind of a house of cards, right? So if you pull one down, the whole thing tumbles down. So they're not willing to question any of it, right? So
that sounds right. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Coming up, Noah's process in planning a story and his tools. Noah and Adam compare notes on moving on from the religious faiths they grew up in, and Noah's thoughts on where to go next after finishing this book. But first, a reminder to join us for 20th Century TV and music trivia quiz videos and more on our Patreon page. Every month, patrons donating $4 a month or more also get a full-length podcast episode reviewing an issue of The Amazing Spider-Man by Lee and Ditko. My discussion with Emmett on issue 35, The Return of the Molten Man, is now available only on Patreon. Check out our goals and rewards at patreon.com/deconcomics. If you'd rather give a one-time donation, you can do so via PayPal by sending it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support.
Welcome to the Superman Fan Podcast. My name is Billy Hogan, and I will be your host. Before we begin our journey through the time barrier, please ensure that your red indestructible capes are securely fastened around your necks so that we may all travel safely into the past to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel in the pages of Action Comics, Superman, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, and World's Finest Comics. After we return from our journey, I encourage you to go to the website, thesupermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com. I look forward to have you join me each week to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel.
Another thing that this is not necessarily in the actual text of the book, this is something that you put in the acknowledgments at the end, but there's something that you said that I think every young cartoonist should read, which is you said, my aim was to tell this piece of American history through dialogue and to bring the reader into the story and not to tell what I think about everything. Mm-hmm. And after you said that, I went back and looked at it, and, it's over 400 pages, and there's not even one block of exposition, which I think is absolutely brilliant. Like that's what the comics medium is supposed to be. So I think you did it's a master course for people who want to tell stories, because the dialogue does bring people in, I think, and it makes it a very relatable story. So,
thanks. I'm happy to notice that. Yeah, and I agree with you on that. I think captions are kind of like the easy way out, and it's not necessary. There are ways around using them and stuff, but it's just going to take more pages. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to do that, so. Yeah, I can't. I always read those like EC comics, or even like the early superhero comics like Stan Lee wrote, and like the captions were so expendable. Like they'd just be repeating what the dialogue was going to say, like rip below it, or something like whatever action you're like about to look at. You're like, I can just get rid of all this stuff. You can read those early comics and not even look at the captions, and you'll have a great time. But the captions really bog that stuff down. So,
oh, definitely. And what they show, honestly, is a lack of trust in the artist to convey what the writer wants to show, and they show a lack of trust in the audience to be able to actually understand that. So
I did that. The first book I did was the hypo, and like I wasn't skilled enough as a cartoonist at that point to pull off just pulling off telling the story through dialogue only. So every chapter started with a big block of dialogue about like what happened, where the characters were.
Sure.
And I think now I could do that better. But that, now I look at that, I'm like, oh, geez, none of that stuff's necessary. You probably just skip those pages.
Yeah, well, we can't revisit our old work. That's it's a different person's work, I guess. But
yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, think about that. If you're like a new human after 7 years, is what they say. It's like I did that book like 12 years ago, so I was a different person almost twice over.
I was wondering that about this book, because how many years did you spend on this book from when you actually set pencil to paper?
About 5 years.
So 5 years, and it's a 400-something page book. Like, I would imagine by the time you got to the end, your drawings look different from the very beginning. Yeah.
Well, I redrew a lot of it, because as I was going, I was constantly learning new details and things. So I'd have to go back and redraw stuff. So the first few chapters were redrawn probably 3 times. I just man.
That hurts my heart to hear that.
Yeah. Well, I really did not know what I was doing. Like, it was a learning process. It was like I've described it before, but it was like a storytelling boot camp where I was just going forward. I knew what the ending of the story was, but I didn't necessarily know how I was going to get there and get there in the best way. So I just kept making mistakes, and so I had to keep going back and like course correcting or adding details and and dialogue that would make sense to like a later part of the book that I figured out or something. It's just constant problem solving all the time. You have to constantly think about it. Take a lot of notes.
Sorry, in your scripting process, I mean, do you actually sit down with a script, or do you thumbnail it all first, or how do you?
No. I'll have like composition notebooks, and as I'm doing research, I'm taking a lot of notes, and like sometimes those notes will come out as thumbnail sketches, and they just get refined on the page. So basically I'll pencil out a whole chapter and then just keep moving forward and start inking from the beginning of there. And as I'm going, I'll have to go back. It's, oh man, I can't even, I call it like the stumble through process. Mm-hmm. Because you don't necessarily, it feels like you're like in a dark room, like trying to feel your way along or something. And it's a mess. I don't sit down and write a whole script and then go forward. I just kind of figure it out as I go along with a vague idea of what the story is.
When you're doing your pencils, you see you pencil out a whole chapter at a time. Are you penciling that fairly rough, or do they kind of follow what your pen lines end up being, or?
No, it's very loose.
Okay.
Because you're in a zone. Let me think about it. It's like if you get into like a zone of like, here's the dialogue. Okay, now I'm like in this place. It's like 2 people are sitting across the table from each other, and they're having a conversation about this, and you're in that moment and you're writing it. you have to stay in that moment. So you're just sitting there writing it directly on the page as you go. And then, okay, that page is over. And then you get the next one and you're writing. And as you're writing it, you're doing very loose drawings of the people. Like if somebody's making like a weird expression or a gesture that you have to capture, you'll pencil that one in a little nicer. But otherwise, it's just very loose. And that way, when you go back and you're ready to ink it, you can add more to it. You've had a little bit more time. You can go back and I know it sounds so. I'm sorry, man. I sound like a crazy person right now, but
no. I think that there's probably people listening to this who are total nerds about this kind of stuff, like the process nerds. And so I love to hear you talk about that.
I never write a full script though. I'm always just on everything I've ever done. I'm always like, I have a vague idea of the story and then I go for it. And then I'm adding all sorts of details and stuff that I wouldn't have thought about if I was just sitting down writing things, things that just kind of like appear to you and you don't even know why. Yeah. You don't know why you're putting a gun in this panel or something like that. You're just like, oh, I should put a gun right here. And then all of a sudden you get some pages further and then all of a sudden, oh my gosh, that gun is going to solve this problem. And there is something weird. Like your brain is constantly connecting dots for yourself as you're going along.
Yeah, I think even visually, even more so than if you were doing it, just writing words. So, I totally see what you're talking about there. I've always wondered that about your books because your finished pen lines have a lot of kind of life to them, and they're very expressive. And so, I figured there's no way that your pencils can be really tight because you've got to be keeping a lot of that kind of action happening when you're in the inking stage.
Yeah, I'm very loose. Yeah, I'm just looking for that casual confidence or something. I want it to seem very casual, like if I'm telling you a story like as it's happening or something, as I'm drawing it.
Sure.
Like this kind of immediacy to it. So
yeah, I think that's the right word for it. That immediacy is definitely what I see in that. And it's one thing when you're doing your own kind of personal stories, but when you're doing something historical like this, it takes on a whole different kind of feeling because you're making kind of stiff historical stories seem more lifelike and, like you said, kind of casual storytelling, which makes it kind of come alive. So I think it's a good mix. There was too many of those, like when we were kids, you'd see historical comics and they always looked really stiffly drawn and they try to make the person look exactly like they look. And you can tell they're working off a lot of references and stuff. Mm-hmm.
So I never do that. Never. I did a Grateful Dead book and like nobody looks like the band members. It's just like creating like a symbol. Like, okay, this represents Jerry Garcia. That's the way I work. I don't, and I get that from Chester Brown, like Louis Riel, or even like the way I portrayed Ronald Reagan in Yummy Fur. It's like Ronald Reagan, but all right. That's Ronald Reagan.
Speaking of Chester Brown, that's a good segue. So in Chester Brown's book, Mary Wept at the Foot of Jesus, he has that, huge, basically like a, exegesis of like the Bible at the back of it. And I know a lot of people didn't like that, but I loved that. And this book, your Joseph Smith book, has a lot of kind of extra text in the back. And I think that really adds a lot of context to the book. I really recommend that readers check that out. Is that something that you were kind of conscious about when you were putting the book together?
Yeah, I always made sure that if I was drawing a scene, I would go to my computer and write where I was getting that scene from. Especially if I thought it was something important, like this is something that people are going to have questions about. Let me make sure that I write down exactly where I'm getting this from or a little bit more information that I can give them that I can't fit into the story because I'm not using captions. It was important because I knew that this book would be challenged a lot. And so I wanted to make sure that I at least had my ducks in a row in the back of the book for people who were wondering about the decisions I made.
Sure. So this book, it starts off with Joseph Smith as a young person kind of using his seer stone looking for treasure, and takes him all the way up to his death before Brigham Young moved the church out to Utah, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So it seems like it was kind of a conscious choice to keep this focused on Joseph Smith and not necessarily as a history of the church.
Yeah. Well, it is a history because it shows the founding of the church, like how it came about,
That's true.
The different, it had different phases. So that stuff is in there, but the focus really is more on Joseph. Yeah.
Was that a choice because you kind of found him as a compelling character, or because it lended itself to a good story?
Well, because that was the person that I really wanted to investigate. I wanted to know about Joseph Smith.
Mm-hmm.
I was learning about him and his life and the events in it and stuff. And then the church part of it was a little more bloated. So the getting into the church more would have meant I would have had to sort out all the characters, which there are so many characters that did not make it into this book. Of course, there's so many people that were boiled down to like one or two people. There's the whole structure of the church. Those things I just couldn't get into.
Sure.
I had to be conscious of like not burdening the reader with too much of that stuff. So simplifying it and being like, we're going to focus more on Joseph Smith, the person, and what was going on in his life. That seemed like the best way to do it. But even that, like I had to boil his life down, of course.
Yeah.
This is not the full story. I mean, I just could not expect to string a reader along for like all the details, but trust me, there's a lot more stuff. Yeah.
So
it's a big story.
in the beginning, you kind of talked about, I think in the intro, you talked about how you were, I guess this is actually in the end of the book. I'm sorry, in the epilogue, or not epilogue, in the acknowledgments, or at the end. But you're talking about how it was something where you personally wanted to investigate this because you felt like the choice wasn't really, it was taken away from you, right?
Yeah.
So, and then you've kind of come to terms with it. I won't ask you necessarily what conclusions you came, but do you feel kind of at peace with all of that now?
Don't feel peace with, man, that's such a big question. I don't know. I guess the fact that I'm, yeah, no, I guess I don't.
Okay. You don't have to answer it. I guess it is.
No, I guess I don't. I mean, I guess I just don't, because I don't think it's something that you ever get rid of in your life.
Sure.
Yeah, it's always there. I think I just know a little bit more now. That's all.
But it goes deep, right? I mean, I've told that to people before, but if you had talked to 20-year-old me, I would have said my religion goes deeper than like my family, to me. Mm-hmm. So trying to extract that when you come out on the other side is impossible because it goes so deep into your core identity. So, and I don't know if I were to go back into the church, if I were to somehow re-find some connection, I don't know how that would be either. So
yeah, I'm curious about how you would fare and that. When did you stop going to church?
I went to Bible college, and that's where I kind of fell out of the faith because I started questioning things, and the more I studied the Bible, the deeper I studied it, the more questions I had, and the more things seemed kind of impossible.
Yeah.
To kind of wrap my head around, and so yeah, I think it would have been probably around when I graduated from university, so 21, something like that.
Okay. And how difficult was it for you to leave?
Very difficult in terms of like with my family. They took it very hard. They took it as probably it was more painful for them than it would have been if I had said I don't want to be part of the family,
Yeah, right. Because it's your soul that they're thinking about.
Exactly. So, and I went through a period, maybe everybody does, but I went through a period where I was very angry and very combative about religion. And so I would go and pick fights.
Maybe that's part of it, you have to go through that phase. I went through that whole thing, like listening to like a lot of like Christopher Hitchens talks, stuff like that.
Oh man,
His
definitely.
books, everything, and like just getting really into like the atheist scene.
Sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think that must be like a step that like everybody goes through, like when they leave a faith. But it's also just kind of reorienting yourself and like figuring out like what you believe or like where you belong after you leave a church.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of that's probably very common for people. But yeah,
Yeah, I
anger.
think so. I think when you look back
I had
on
a lot of that, when I was a teenager, after my family fell apart and like I was pulled out of the church, my younger sibling Jonah was, and my sister Abby was above me and stuff. I think I was very angry, and not just at my parents' divorce, but the fact that like you're raised in this faith where they tell you have this. It's a really secure thing. Like they're like, here's what your path is, and here's what's going to happen after you die, and stuff like that. And you're just here on this earth to not mess up. And then when that is taken away from you, suddenly you're like very confused and angry. Because that whole structure is gone. And then on top of that, your parents aren't together anymore. So there's all those struggles as well. It's actually kind of a nightmare to put somebody through that stuff. It's psychological warfare.
It is. Yeah, I totally agree. So, and when I see people going through that same angry phase and stuff, because I've seen my younger brothers and, sisters kind of come through too. And I see them going through the same steps, I don't know if it was Christopher Hitchens, but it's somebody that they latch onto. And then, I know they're going to come out on the other side and kind of see the value of religion at some point, but
that's kind of where I landed, was like, I'm not anti-religious. Like I understand, I live in the South, so like everybody's in church and stuff. And I'm not like, you guys are stupid. I don't feel that way at all. I just feel like it's very helpful for a lot of people. It's damaging for a lot of people. I don't know. Everybody kind of has their own path. And I'm not more clever than anybody else. And I still don't know what happens when we die. So I just, I can't be snarky about it or anything. I just kind of let them do what they're going to do,
Sure. Definitely. Well, let's we're kind of getting into the into the weeds, I guess, with this, but kind of getting back to your book and getting into some of the like I said, I think a lot of people kind of are process nerds and would love to hear you talk about that. So one thing that I really, really liked about your book is and all of your books is the way that you kind of build up texture in your drawings.
Yeah.
You have kind of a combination of like ink washes and then colored pencils on top of that, and maybe sometimes like a palette knife and stuff. What are some of the tools that you're using to make this book?
For this book, it was just watercolors, colored pencils, and then like you put that stuff on a separate layer and you scan that in with the line work and you place that underneath the line work, and then below that stuff is another layer of just flat computer coloring.
Okay.
Yeah, different textures and stuff like that. I just like textures in my artwork, and I like my coloring to match my drawing. So like if my drawing is immediate, I want my coloring to complement that, to look similar. So I found my own coloring style that I stick to.
Yeah, I've noticed, I don't remember which book it was, but I noticed that was something that you kind of discovered somewhere along the way, because not all of your books had that.
No, it was my hot date is where I discovered that, because I was in a relationship with a woman who was like in art school, and she showed me how to use layers on Photoshop. And I never knew that. I never knew how to use it. And like immediately then like all my comics they were all in color after that, So It was, like 2015 or something.
So when you started doing the color, then did you feel kind of free to let go on some of the minute like cross hatching that you were doing in the past?
Sometimes, but that's like something you kind of grow out of. That was really my early like art crumb and obsessed period, as a young man. And then I discovered like a lot of like European comics, which had like a very similar, like a very like spontaneous, loose kind of Jules Pfeiffer almost line. And then I became obsessed with that and trying to figure that out for myself, because it's like like, so like as an artist, like you're born with like a line, like everybody has like a line, and you can try to make that line into something that's like anatomically correct. Sometimes you can pull that off. A lot of like superhero artists, or whatever, can do that kind of stuff. And I wish that I could, but I could never do it. And it's just like my brain doesn't work that way. And the line that I was born with it won't form that like that. So I had to figure out like, okay, well, what's the most attractive way that I can use this line? When I discovered, I made so many errors and stuff, I tried to make very serious looking comics and they just looked like kind of goofy. And then when I discovered European comics and like how loose they were, I felt like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do with this. I don't have the control to do something else, to do something tighter. It has to be this way. This is what it is. So like that really helped me out a lot. I remember I went to Angoulême for the first time, the festival in France, and on the plane ride home, I was so inspired by all the comics that I saw there. Like I really felt like a kinship with a lot of those artists. And on the plane ride home, I just sat in my sketchbook and just drew and like tried to fix my style and kind of reorient myself towards whatever they were doing,
Sure. I definitely see that, I definitely see the European influence. So, but still, it doesn't. Your books don't look necessarily like bande dessinée. They still look American indie comic style, but with that kind of added flavor. Yeah,
I was just inspired by that, by their attitude towards it, and like how they're, their what's it called, like laissez-faire attitude towards like line work and stuff. I don't know. I just thought it was so beautiful.
Yeah,
effortless style. I just want to capture that.
So you are not really drawing digitally at all. Then you're just using Photoshop and stuff to kind of clean up or to like add layers and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't draw digitally. No, I have to draw on paper. I like to have like a physical. After you work so hard, it's nice to actually have like a real object in front of you that you have worked on.
Sure, definitely. Well, and also then you can donate it to BYU when you're done. So.
That's right. Yeah. Or I sell it to collectors. Like there's a lot of comic art collectors and a lot of people that started collecting my pages. So that's really nice.
Yeah. Do you kind of wish that you held on to some of these so that you could sell them to the collectors?
The Joseph Smith pages?
Yeah.
No, because this is like a different thing. Like I really think that it should be kept together. Mm-hmm. I feel like it should all stay together. That's all. That was my one wish about it. So yeah, but I'm willing. I'll redraw a page for somebody if they want one. I'll go that far. But yeah.
So now that this project is done, you've taken all these, research trips and you read countless books and you spent 5 years sitting at the table putting this whole thing out, and now it's out there for the world to see. Are you mostly feeling kind of like a weight is off of your shoulders, or are you feeling really anxious and nervous about it? Or
you mean like anxious and nervous about how it's going to be received?
Yeah,
you get that definitely, because you work so hard on something and you are alone with it for so long that when you release it, it's really it's nerve-wracking. You don't know how people what they're going to think of it. Mm-hmm. But I have this sort of like almost postpartum depression or something going on. Like when I finished it, I wasn't sure what I was going to do next, and I still don't really know. Like I'm just kind of twiddling my thumbs or like making false starts on different projects, but I just don't know what to do now. Like how do I proceed? Like do I do like another Fonte Bukowski book? Like what follows something like this? I have no idea. So for the past year, I've literally just been like thinking, what can I do now? What's like another book? Am I supposed to top this, or can I just go back to having fun? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a weird position to be in, I'm sure. Like and maybe that's a good place, I guess. I mean, you can be kind of in a receiving mode and taking stuff in and inspiration to charge up for your next project. I don't know, but
yeah, I am thinking about that all the time. I'm always like, what's a good subject? What could be like another book? But I just want to write fiction or something for a while, or I want to do like another issue of Blammo. Mm-hmm. But I don't want the I don't want to feel any pressure about what I do next. Like I just want to goof off and have fun. And I want a whole bunch of people to be watching what I'm doing.
Yeah, I can't imagine what that must be like.
Yeah, it just feels like it. That's all, because now, like, this book has already done so much better than anything I've ever done, and there's such a huge audience for it. And then now, so that there's a pressure on me now to do something similar. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, especially if it goes on to win awards and things like that, then you're going to have to try to, you're going to have to try to top it, I guess.
Yeah. What could I possibly do?
You know what, though? That's what I thought about Durf when he put out, his Jeffrey Dahmer book. I thought, like, he was really lucky to have this story in that, obviously he did a great job of retelling it, but he was really lucky to have this thing in his past that he could tell a story about. And when that blew up, I thought, well, what can he possibly do next? And then his book about, the
Kent State.
Kent State was amazing, and so I guess there's
something.
Yeah. But you're probably done with Mormons as a topic, I suppose.
I think I should move away from it. Yeah, I don't want to be the Mormon cartoonist.
Yeah. Well, Noah, I really appreciate your time talking about all of this, and I hope everybody will go out and check out this book available from Abrams Comic Arts, and it's available on Amazon and everywhere else. And is it still possible to get signed copies?
Yeah, there's just a bookstore here in town called Oddbird Books, and I have like a link. You can get a copy directly from them, and I went down there and signed a whole bunch of them, so there still should be some there. Okay, and can you tell people where they can find you if they want to find you on social media or anything like that? Oh, yeah. Well, I just have an Instagram and Facebook, of course, but I don't know if anybody wants to be on. People are moving away from Facebook, right? That's not cool anymore. But well, we're old, yeah. So yeah, I'm on there just because I've always been on there. But yeah. I think Instagram is just, I think it's Noah VS Comics. Okay. All right, everybody check out Noah's stuff and follow him for the next work that's going to blow this one out of the water whenever that comes out. Yeah, right. 10 years from now. Yeah. Thanks again, Noah. Thank you.
Joseph Smith and the Mormons is published by Abrams Comic Arts. You can help the Deconstructing Comics family of podcasts by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics, and go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and we'll critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read it and record our critique. Next week, Patrick, my co-host on our Full Metal Alchemist podcast, The Law of Equivalent Exchange, joins me to discuss his research into how mermaids, and mermen as well, have been used in manga over the years, with a focus on the work of Osamu Tezuka, Rumiko Takahashi, and Kazuo Umezu. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.